The boardroom went silent, except for Dad's condescending chuckle echoing off the mahogany walls. I had known this moment would arrive eventually. 3 years of building my investment portfolio in complete secrecy. 3 years of watching my parents dismiss every opinion I offered about their struggling tech manufacturing company. 3 years of, sweetie, let the adults handle business, at every family dinner. But I hadn't expected the confrontation to feel quite like this. My parents, Jonathan and Margaret Hayes, had built Hayes Technologies from a garage startup 25 years ago. They manufactured specialized circuit boards for aerospace applications, dominating their niche for 2 decades. But the last 5 years had been brutal. Competition from overseas, failure to innovate, and frankly some catastrophically poor financial decisions had left them hemorrhaging money. I was their only child, their daughter Clara, who'd majored in something useless, according to them, computational finance and applied mathematics at MIT. After graduation, I had taken a position at what Mom called my little job at a boutique investment firm in Boston. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just an analyst. I was a partner. I had spent the last 3 years making extremely calculated investment decisions that had grown my personal portfolio from my signing bonus and early stock options into something substantial. Very substantial. The emergency board meeting had been called because Hayes Technologies was circling the drain. They had burned through their credit lines, alienated 2 major clients with delayed deliveries, and were facing a potential bankruptcy filing within 60 days. The board had been meeting for 2 hours before I arrived, and I had deliberately come in late, slipping into a seat at the back of the room. Mom spotted me immediately. "Clara, what are you doing here?" "This is a board meeting." "I was invited," I said quietly, keeping my voice level. Dad laughed, a slow, condescending sound I had heard my entire life whenever I tried to discuss business with them. "Invited? Honey, this is serious business. We are discussing the future of the company." "I understand that. Do you?" Mom's tone sharpened. We weren't talking about trivial matters, complex financial restructuring, debt-to-equity swaps, and convertible notes. I opened my laptop and said nothing. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Most of them knew why I was there. The chairman had insisted on my attendance, but my parents were clearly in the dark. Elliot Kane, their CFO, tried to redirect. "Jonathan, Margaret, perhaps we should continue with the agenda. We need to discuss the refinancing proposals." "In a minute," Dad said, still focused on me. "Clara, sweetheart, I appreciate that you're trying to be supportive, but this really isn't appropriate. These are confidential discussions about the company's financial situation." "I'm aware of the financial situation," I replied calmly. "Revenue down 42% over 3 years. Operating losses of $18 million last quarter alone. Current burn rate gives you maybe 8 weeks of runway." The room went completely still. Mom's face flushed. "Where did you hear those numbers?" "The preliminary financial reports. I reviewed them last week." "Those reports are confidential," Dad snapped. Thomas Whitaker, the board chairman and one of the original angel investors, cleared his throat. "Jonathan, Margaret, I think we need to." "No, this is completely inappropriate," Mom interrupted. "Clara, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to leave now." I didn't move. I'm a voting member of this board. I have every right to be here. Dad's laughter echoed again, that same condescending tone I had grown up hearing whenever I tried to discuss business with them. A voting member. Clara, you don't own any shares in Hayes Technologies. You're not on the board. I don't know who told you that you could just walk into a board meeting. She owns 47% of the company, Thomas said quietly, his voice calm but firm. The words hung in the room like a bomb that hadn't fully detonated yet. Mom's eyes widened. What did you just say? Clara owns 47% of Hayes Technologies, Thomas continued. She's been accumulating shares over the past 14 months. She's our largest single shareholder and has been for 6 months. I watched my father's face shift through confusion, disbelief, and then anger. Impossible. The shares are closely held. We'd have to approve any transfer. The shares she purchased were from the employee stock option pool and from 3 board members who sold their positions, Thomas explained. All legitimate, arm's-length transactions. Fully documented with the SEC. Mom's voice wavered, losing its usual certainty. Clara doesn't have that kind of money. Do you know what 47% of this company is worth? I asked quietly. Based on your last valuation, approximately $440 million, I said. Though honestly, that valuation is generous. Based on current performance, I'd estimate closer to $320 million, so I overpaid by about $120 million. The room fell completely silent. Elliot's fingers hovered over his laptop, processing the filings. By God, she's right. All the SEC filings are here. How did I miss this? Because the purchases were made through 3 different LLCs, I explained calmly. All properly disclosed, but you'd have to dig to connect them all to me. Dad's chair scraped loudly as he stood. This is some kind of joke, Clara. What game are you playing? No game, Dad. I'm an investor. And I'm a concerned one. This company is in serious trouble. Dad turned to the board members, voice rising with frustration. She can't even read a balance sheet. She's 28 years old, works as a junior analyst. She's a managing partner at Quantum Capital, Thomas interrupted. She's been running their tech portfolio for 2 years. Her fund returned 43% last year. Mom paled. That's impossible. We would have known. You would have dismissed it like everything else I've ever done, I said simply. Every suggestion, every success, ignored. Dismissed because it didn't match your definition of real business. Mom's sharp tone softened slightly, tinged with desperation. Don't take that tone with us. Now, don't dismiss me in a board meeting, I replied firmly. I'm here as an investor. A majority investor, actually. This morning, I closed an agreement to purchase an additional 8% from Daniel Roth. I glanced around the table. The board members shifted uncomfortably. I continued, that brings my total to 55%, majority shareholder. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Elliot typed furiously. Mom and Dad stared at me like I had grown a second head. Thomas banged his gavel. Order. Let's calm down and address this rationally. Dad's voice softened but remained tense. If this is true, what exactly do you plan to do, Clara? Swoop in and save the company with your vast business experience. I plan to vote to approve the restructuring plan Thomas proposed, I replied. The one you were about to reject. Mom looked toward Thomas. What restructuring plan? Thomas slid a document across the table. Quantum Capital, through one of its funds, has offered a $200 million investment to restructure and stabilize Hayes Technologies. Quantum Capital, through one of its funds, has offered a $200 million investment to restructure and stabilize Hayes Technologies, Thomas explained, sliding the document across the table. This capital will allow the company to modernize the manufacturing lines, reinvest in R&D that has been cut, and hire the senior management you desperately need. Dad's jaw tightened. Absolutely not. We're not diluting ourselves into minority shareholders of our own company. You already are minority shareholders, I countered calmly. I own 55% as of this morning. This is corporate rating, Mom spat, her voice shaking. You're trying to steal the company we built. I'm trying to save it, I said firmly. If you file for bankruptcy, everything is lost. The company would be liquidated. The brand sold for parts. And 240 employees would lose their jobs. This way, the company survives, grows, and everyone keeps their jobs. Dad's bitter tone rose. Under your control. Under professional management, I corrected. I'm voting to retain Thomas as chairman. I'm voting to bring in Catherine Walsh from Innovate as CEO. And I'm voting to create a new executive committee that will hold leadership accountable to the board. Mom looked at me, worry and disbelief flickering in her eyes. And what about us? You remain on the board, I said. Your salaries will be adjusted to market rates. You'll still have influence, but the company will continue to operate successfully instead of collapsing. Dad's hands ran through his hair. You're 28 years old. You've been working for what, 5 years? And you expect us to believe you have $440 million to invest in a struggling manufacturing company. I have $620 million under management as of last quarter, I said calmly. This doesn't even count the $4.2 billion in funds I manage for Quantum. The Hayes Technologies investment represents roughly 70% of my personal portfolio. Yes, it's a significant bet, but with the right management and capital, this company can be worth $2 billion in 5 years. Elliot looked up from his laptop, nodding slowly. The models are conservative. If we can lock down the SpaceX contract Clara's referring to, what SpaceX contract? Mom interrupted, shock crossing her face. The one I've been negotiating for 4 months, I said. They need a specialized circuit board manufacturer for their next-generation Starlink satellites. Hayes Technologies has the exact capabilities, but you lack the capital to handle the order volume. With Quantum's investment, production can scale to meet the contract. It's a $340 million deal over 3 years, with renewal options. Dad froze mid-step. Mom gripped the edge of the table. Why? She finally asked. If you have all this money, all this success, why invest in us? You could have let us fail. You could have bought the assets for pennies on the dollar. Because, despite everything, it's still the company you built, I said softly. Because 240 people rely on these jobs. Because the technology is solid, the brand has value, and the market opportunity is real. And because I wanted to prove I could do it. Dad's voice faltered. Prove what? That I understand business, I said simply, letting the weight of the words hang in the air. I watched my father flush and my mother look away. Thomas cleared his throat. I suggest a 15-minute recess. Let everyone process this information. Then we can reconvene and vote on the restructuring proposal. The board members filed out, avoiding eye contact with my parents. Elliot left his laptop open, SEC filings still displayed. Thomas lingered. Clara, could I speak with you outside? I nodded and followed him into the hallway, leaving Jonathan and Margaret alone in the boardroom, still reeling from the revelation. Once we were out of earshot, Thomas exhaled slowly. That was brutal, he said quietly. It had to be, I replied. I tried to warn them privately 3 months ago. I called Jonathan to discuss the company's financial situation. His response. Focus on my career, let him handle the business. Thomas shook his head. The restructuring plan is solid. Catherine Walsh is an excellent choice for CEO. But you know this is going to destroy your relationship with your parents. What relationship? I asked. The one where every achievement is dismissed because it doesn't match their definition of success. Where I'm treated like a child who doesn't understand the world. They are proud of what they built, Thomas said. This company has been their entire life. I know, I said, and I'm trying to ensure it survives. But they have to understand that their way isn't working anymore. The market has changed, the technology has changed. They refuse to evolve, and now I'm forcing their hand. Thomas studied me for a long moment. You know, when you first approached me about buying your shares, I almost said no. I thought you were too young, too inexperienced. Then I looked at your track record, the companies you'd invested in, the returns you'd generated. You have an instinct for this that most people spend decades developing. I nodded. My parents taught me everything about manufacturing. I just applied those lessons to finance instead of circuit boards. Spot inefficiencies, analyze markets, evaluate risk. All skills I learned at home, just applied differently. Thomas smiled faintly. Ironic, isn't it? Extremely, I agreed. We stood in silence, watching through the hallway windows as my parents sat at opposite ends of the long table, not speaking to each other. They're going to fight this, Thomas warned. They'll look for any legal angle to block the restructuring. I know, I said. That's why every filing is perfect. Every transaction arm's length. Every disclosure timely. They can hire the best lawyers in the world, they won't find anything improper. You've been planning this for a long time, Thomas said. 14 months, I confirmed. Since the first time I saw the quarterly financials and realized how bad things had gotten. Thomas shook his head slowly. Your parents are brilliant engineers. Revolutionary technology. Terrible managers. And worse at admitting when they need help. That's why this plan puts real operators in charge, people who know how to scale a manufacturing business, manage supply chains, and handle growth. Exactly, I said. My parents can focus on what they're actually good at, engineering and product development, but not day-to-day operations. think they'll accept that?" Thomas asked. "They don't have a choice," I replied. "I control 55% of the shares. I can outvote them on any decision." Thomas let out a soft sigh. "No, probably not. At first. But eventually, when the company stabilizes and grows, maybe they'll understand. If not, at least 240 people keep their jobs, and a good company doesn't die because of ego and stubbornness." The hallway clock ticked, stretching the 15-minute recess to 20, then 25 minutes. Finally, Thomas suggested we reconvene. The board members filed back in, taking their seats around the table. My parents entered last, sitting together, a united front despite everything. Thomas called the meeting to order. "We have a proposal on the table for a $200 million investment from Quantum Capital," he began, "in exchange for convertible notes and board restructuring. I'd like to open the floor for discussion before we vote." Dad immediately stood. "I have something to say." Dad straightened, regaining some of his composure, his voice carrying that formal tone he always used when he wanted to sound important. "What Clara has done here today is legal, perhaps," he began, "but it's not ethical. She has used her position, her knowledge of our vulnerabilities to orchestrate a hostile takeover of the company Margaret and I spent 25 years building." "Dad," I started, but he held up a hand. "I'm not finished. You sat in our home, ate at our table, and said nothing while secretly buying shares in our company. You positioned yourself to swoop in when we were most vulnerable and seize control. And now you want us to simply accept being minority shareholders in our own company, stepping aside while some outsider takes over." "Catherine Walsh isn't an outsider," I said calmly. "She's one of the most respected operators in the industry. She took Innovate from $50 million in revenue to $800 million in 7 years. She's not us," Mom interjected sharply. "She doesn't understand our culture, our values, or what we've built." Respectfully, Elliot said quietly, "Your culture and values won't matter if the company goes bankrupt in 2 months." Dad turned toward him, frustrated. "And whose side are you on, Elliot?" "I'm on the side of the 240 employees who depend on their paychecks," Elliot replied steadily. "On the side of the pension fund that covers their retirement. On the side of keeping this company alive, and Clara's plan is the only viable option on the table." "That's not true," Dad argued. "We have other offers." "We could. You have one other offer," Thomas interrupted. "From Davidson Industrial. They're offering $120 million for the assets in bankruptcy. They'll keep maybe 30 employees, then shut down the facility and move production to Malaysia. Everyone else loses their jobs." Mom's voice wavered. "There have to be other options." "There aren't," I said quietly. "I've spent 4 months analyzing every possibility. Every strategic buyer, private equity firm, and investment bank. The market for specialized circuit board manufacturers is brutal. You're competing against companies with lower costs, better technology, and deeper pockets. Quantum is willing to invest because I am willing to stake my personal capital, and because I've secured the SpaceX contract, contingent on this restructuring." Dad's voice cracked slightly. "You should have come to us. Told us what you were planning." "I tried," I said firmly. 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. Every attempt dismissed, condescended to. Every suggestion ignored. Now they have no choice but to see the truth. I understand business, and I am saving the company you built. Mom's eyes shimmered with frustration and disbelief, but she said nothing. Thomas cleared his throat. It's time to vote. All in favor of accepting the quantum capital restructuring proposal, raise your hands. I lifted mine immediately. I raised my hand immediately. Thomas and Elliot followed, their expressions solemn. 3 other board members, old colleagues of my parents, hesitated, then reluctantly raised theirs in opposition. My parents' hands shot up as well. 4 votes against, 6 in favor. The motion carries, Thomas announced. The restructuring is approved. Dad stood abruptly, pacing the room. We'll challenge this. We'll find a lawyer who can prove Clara manipulated the situation, used insider information. Every transaction was logged and disclosed, Elliot said quietly. I've reviewed every filing. They're all clean. You can hire every lawyer in New York, Jonathan, but it won't change a thing. Mom glared at me, her expression unreadable, hurt, anger, maybe even fear. Thomas cleared his throat. There's one more item on the agenda. Clara has requested to address the full company staff tomorrow at 10 a.m. She wants to explain the restructuring and answer questions. Given her position as majority shareholder, I think that's appropriate. Absolutely not. Dad barked. Those are our employees. They're the company's employees. They deserve to hear from someone who can actually answer their questions about job security and the future, I corrected gently. Mom shook her head, gathering her things. What you've done here today, Clara, it's not just about business. You've destroyed your family over money and control. I've saved your company, I said firmly. Whether you can see that or not. My parents left without another word. The other board members filed out more slowly. Some stopped to shake my hand, murmuring congratulations, while others avoided eye contact entirely. Finally, it was just Thomas, Elliot, and me in the boardroom. That was the most dramatic board meeting I've attended in 35 years, Elliot said, leaning back in his chair. It had to be done, Thomas replied. Jonathan and Margaret would have driven this company into the ground rather than admit they needed help. Will they recover from this? Elliot asked quietly. As people, I mean, not as executives. I thought about it. I don't know. Maybe eventually. Or maybe they'll never forgive me for proving them wrong. But for what it's worth, Thomas raised an eyebrow. Yes. You did the right thing. Not the easy thing, but the right thing. I closed my laptop and gathered my materials. I needed to prepare for tomorrow's meeting with the employees. They were going to have questions, tough questions. Clara, Elliot said as I reached the door, that SpaceX contract, is it really solid? I smiled faintly. Verbal commitment from their VP of supply chain. Contract language is being finalized by their legal team. Signatures should be in 3 weeks. Why? Because if we pull that off, I said, this company doesn't just survive, it thrives. We transform it from a struggling manufacturer into a key supplier for the biggest space company in the world. Thomas nodded. That's the plan. I stepped out of the building, the sun setting over the parking lot. My phone buzzed, Quantum Capital, Catherine Walsh, my lawyer, all confirming details. No messages from my parents. I stared at the Hayes Technologies building. 25 years of work. Innovation, struggle, success, and now failure to adapt. And now it was my responsibility to fix it. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Thomas. Employee meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m. Conference room B. About 200 people. Most are terrified. Be ready for tough questions. I typed back, I'm ready. And I was. 14 months of preparation had led to this moment. Countless hours analyzing every aspect of the business, every production line, every efficiency ratio, every cost center. I knew Hayes Technologies better than my parents did now. But nothing could prepare me for the hollow feeling in my chest when I thought about my mother's face as she left the boardroom, or the way my father's voice had cracked when he asked why I hadn't come to them sooner. 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, every attempt to warn them had been met with dismissal, condescension, and the same refrain, you don't understand business. Well, now they knew I did. I started my car and drove away from the Hayes Technologies building, the building that represented my parents' entire lives, now under the majority control of their daughter who couldn't even read a balance sheet. Tomorrow, I would stand in front of 200 scared employees and explain how we were going to save their jobs. I would outline the restructuring plan, announce the SpaceX contract, and introduce Catherine Walsh as their new CEO. Somewhere in the back of the room, my parents would be watching their daughter, the one who worked a little job, the one who was supposed to let the adults handle important things, explaining how she had saved everything they had built. Would they thank me or hate me for it? That remained to be seen. But the company would survive. The jobs would be saved. And that had to be enough, even if it meant my parents might never speak to me again. I parked near the entrance and took a deep breath. The air smelled faintly of machinery, metal, and industry, the familiar scent of a company I had grown up in, yet one I was now tasked to save. I gathered my materials, the restructuring plan, the SpaceX contract drafts, the notes on employee questions. Everything was in order. Every detail accounted for. Clara, the girl they dismissed as naive, inexperienced, and unfit to run anything, was now the majority shareholder, poised to lead a company into a new era. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but I felt ready. As I walked toward the building, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Tomorrow, everything would change. Hayes Technologies would have a future, and I would be at the center of it, proving that knowledge, preparation, and courage could overcome years of doubt, dismissal, and underestimation. No matter the personal cost, I had done what was necessary. The company, the employees, the legacy, all of it was now in my hands. And I wasn't going to fail.